The incentives overall for investing in ISAs have really gone down. Like some of the frozen tax thresholds have gone up, have really increased people's tax. The incentives for investing have actually reduced.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne, and in this episode, we're going to uncover what's been going on in this year's budget announcement. So wherever you are and however you think you might be affected, we're going to dig into all of the different changes and see who has benefited the most from the policies presented and who might be affected the most. Joining us today is Moira O'Neil. Moira is an independent freelance investment journalist and writer, editor and presenter. She's a columnist at the Financial Times Money and was previously head of content at Interactive Investor. Moira, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Brianne.
So this year's budget has been nothing short of controversial. We've had leaks, we've had U-turns, we've had a bit of everything. But now that it's finally hit our screens and we've been able to see what's going on, I guess it's time to kind of dig into some of the policy changes that have come up. So first of all, the thing that we're going to dig into is a big change that has affected savers. So something that was floating around earlier last year was potentially lowering the cash ISA allowance, which initially was £20,000, but in the budget has now been reduced to £12,000 for under 65s.
Yeah, that is quite a big move. And the ISA regime has been pretty complicated over the last 10 or so years. It used to be simpler than it is now. We've got multiple different types of ISAs, and the public do find this difficult to understand. So introducing, a limit on how much of the ISA allowance you can put into cash, which used to be 20,000, is now going to be 12,000, and then saying you can only have that remaining 8,000 needs to be in investments, is the reason. Now, this is entirely rational because people do put too much money into cash. They don't put enough into investments. And so hopefully, I think the Chancellor will be thinking this might change behaviour. Whether it will, I'm doubtful. There has to be a lot of education around this stuff to really push people to do the right thing with their money. Really interesting that for the over 65s, they're not going to have this reduction in cash allowance. Now, of course, people over 65 are in retirement. They quite often become a bit more cautious about their money. Once they're not earning an income through the workplace, you start thinking, I don't want as much in investments. So maybe that's the rationale for allowing them to continue to have the £20,000 cash allowance. And of course, people taking out their big pension lump sum money from a pension need somewhere to put that. And the ISA is usually the obvious place. So being allowed to have £20,000 of pension cash moved into an ISA will be beneficial still for those retirees. So interesting move. And Brown, in conjunction with this alteration to the sort of main ISA allowance, the lifetime ISA is also going to come under scrutiny. Now, that's the ISA allowance that is there for people under 40 who are saving for a house purchase.
Yeah.
And if they don't buy their house, then they can use the money for retirement. And there is a government sweetener attached to the lifetime allowance. It hasn't worked as well as it should have since it was introduced. And so there's going to be a consultation on the lifetime allowance, which I think is fairly sensible. If something hasn't been working well, then you ought to review it in detail and see what should be done instead. I think likely that the new product will just focus on saving for a deposit for a home, because confusing that with and you do retirement as well with this product, it's just been really complicated, difficult to understand.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a really good point in terms of trying to make these products as efficient and understandable for everybody. And I guess it all boils down to understanding and making sure people can access them in a similar way. So touching on the cash ISA allowance, I guess the rationale of trying to encourage more people to invest, you can kind of see it. In practice, however, it does seem to have a lot of limitations in the sense that the education necessarily might not be there. You know, people tend to have a reason for wanting to hold more cash, rightly or wrongly. Perhaps it does benefit them in the short term, for example, if they're building up an emergency fund or something like that. Keeping it in cash does make sense. So I guess trying to transfer people into a more investor mindset might take a bit more work than just reducing the allowance.
Definitely. And of course, that allowance of 20,000 has been the same for many, many years now.
Yeah.
It's not been uplifted in line with inflation. So the incentives overall for investing in ISAs have really gone down. Like some of the frozen tax thresholds have gone up, have really increased people's tax. You know, the incentives for investing have actually reduced. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we will see a bit more in terms of collective education and ensuring that people are empowered to take that step into investment if they're hoping to. And on the lifetime ISA point, it's a really interesting topic because the question of how fit for purpose the lifetime ISA has come up quite a lot. And I suppose the idea is to have something that's long term. So whether that's building up your fund for your first home or for retirement, it does miss the mark in some areas, particularly around home ownership when it comes to the value of property that you can buy. In some places, the 450,000 limit on a home that you can get without incurring a withdrawal fee is fine, but with house prices rising in certain areas more than others, I guess that balance of how effective it is comes into question.
Definitely.
So one of the other areas in which people might find the budget a little bit challenging is around the idea of pension saving and using a tactic called salary sacrifice to balance their finances. So salary sacrifice essentially allows you to take a portion of your income out and pay it into your pension before it gets taxed. However, this has now been capped to £2,000.
Yeah, well, we all have an annual pension allowance of 60,000, and people can use that. Now, people who were on very high incomes quite often wanted to use their annual bonus. Rachel Reeves specifically mentioned this in the budget. She said financial services workers with bonuses were using salary sacrifice, and they were using it to reduce down their income as well. To get below the 100,000 mark, usually, which is where these punitive levels of income tax and reduction of child benefit and childcare benefits clocks in. So that salary sacrifice is being used a lot in the city by wealthy workers for various reasons, and clamping down on it, saying you can only use £2,000 worth of it. Doesn't remove it as a tactic, but it does water it down significantly. Now, all the benefits that are attached to pensions are still there. That's a huge relief from this budget. So we still have the tax-free lump sum, 25%, which people were worried about that might disappear. We still have the higher rates tax relief on pensions. So if you are wealthy and you're wanting to contribute to a pension, there's still a lot of incentive to do that. So that will be very welcome still. But I do think those who are going to do salary sacrifice or who are planning to do it in the next year will be using it as much as they possibly can before it's reduced down to that £2,000 limit.
Absolutely. And I suppose for people who potentially might start turbocharging their usage of salary sacrifice, are there any pitfalls they need to be aware of or look out for before, trying to get as much money in before those allowances change?
Yeah, well, not everyone has access to this because it depends on whether your employer allows it. It's usually done through the employer. It benefits the employer as well because they can save on national insurance contributions. So pitfalls, the pitfall of putting more money into a pension is you can't access it until you're a certain age. And so, but I can't, most people who do salary sacrifice are doing it for a very good reason that's usually thought out. And a lot of them are doing it with the help of a financial advisor who's telling them that would be a good thing, because employers haven't been very good at promoting it as a benefit, really. And so usually it is people who have been, what about salary sacrifice? Does your employer do it? You should investigate that. It would be very beneficial to reducing your overall tax bill. And so that's the way it's usually gone. And, obviously it will continue to be used, but just in much smaller amounts.
Absolutely. And I suppose looking at the working population and the taxes that have slowly started to creep in, the freezing of income tax thresholds until 2031, on the offset, I suppose sounds like at least taxes aren't going up. But when you look at inflation and wage growth, it does technically drag people into different tax brackets if they are to earn more. How do you think this kind of affects the way that workers are kind of operating in this space?
Yeah, well, it's nothing new. Those tax thresholds have been frozen for quite a long time, and it all started, I think, under the coalition government. Remember that? That's where this tactic of freezing thresholds and what the tax people call fiscal drag actually started. And the Conservatives used it, and they set in place, a legacy that the Labour government has inherited. And now the Labour government is carrying on with the tax freeze, basically. If you look at, for example, the personal allowance, so that's the amount you can receive tax-free from in income. So that's £12,570 a year. And that's now frozen until 2031. Now, I spoke to a tax expert earlier who said, had it increased with inflation, that allowance would now be £16,000. Quite a big difference.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah. And then if you look at the threshold for paying higher rate tax, which is where a lot more people are being caught to now, what the government has done today in today's budget is actually going to drag 1 million people into paying higher rate tax of 40%. So this is, these are big things that are happening. And of course, what you can do to avoid the 40% tax is to think about putting more money into a pension. So there will be solutions, but then families need to think about what income they need to survive on as well. So it's all a balance. There are things you can do to avoid paying taxes, like using your full ISA allowance and your full pension allowance where possible. But not everyone's in a position to do that.
Absolutely. It does change the landscape in a way that I guess people do need to get more engaged in their finances. It's not a case of just letting things tick on or relying on strategies in the past. I think everybody now has to take a really big look at what's going on and see what is my personal budget saying and how does it align with the policy changes that have come into place. For anybody that is, I guess, kind of trying to work things out. So in the past, they may have said, okay, I'm going to use salary sacrifice to adjust the sort of income tax levels that I'm in. Are there any alternatives that people should consider, or what kind of things can they have in place?
There isn't really an alternative. You can always consider putting more money into your pension, but I mean, it's not quite the same as doing salary sacrifice. I've said use your full ISA allowance. There are things like venture capital trusts, but I noticed in the budget notes today, venture capital trusts are very advantageous and are used by wealthy savers. Now they invest in riskier investments, and the benefit is there's a sort of tax incentive of 30%, a bit like a pension. You get like a income tax relief when you put money in. But I noticed in the notes, the government's going to reduce that down to 20%. So they're not going to be as advantageous. And also they're not going to, there probably won't be as much fundraising done in them as a result. So Yeah, it is getting trickier. I mean, money now held outside these tax efficient wrappers, such as ISAs and pensions, is going to be taxed more as well. So in the budget today, I notice there's going to be an increase on income from savings and investments and property. So there's going to be a 2 percentage point increase on tax from, money that you've saved up, whether it's in property or shares. Dividends from shares held in an ordinary taxable account will now be taxed more. So that's then an incentive to get your money into an ISA where possible, but wealthier savers won't be able to necessarily do that because they'll have more than is in the ISA allowance. I think the property thing is really interesting because landlords have had a lot of extra taxes put on them in recent years, to the point where becoming a buy-to-let landlord, it looks loads more difficult than it was 10 years ago. And they're going to have this extra tax on their income too. So, it's another hit for landlords. Why anyone would want to become one, I don't know now.
It does feel like, in terms of taxation and other charges, the buy-to-let system is becoming less advantageous compared to what it used to be. So it will be interesting to see how that kind of affects the wider property market. There have been reports of an influx of these buy-to-let homes now being, sold and put up for sale. So there could be an injection of new homes into the market, but I guess we'll see how far this continues.
And of course, we've now got this mansion tax, which has been brought in today's budget. So, properties over 2 million are going to have an annual tax of £2,500. And there's going to be a sort of sliding scale going up to 5 million, at which point, if your house is worth 5 million, you're going to be taxed £7,500 a year. It's causing a bit consternation, particularly in the London area and southeast, where there has been significant property inflation. And I think it will impact the housing market, definitely. People won't want to be near a particular threshold where they're going to have an annual, bill. And particularly there's a lot of people who are sort of house rich, cash poor. So they will be thinking, should we just sell up? Yeah, I have a friend who's instantly saying that to me. Because disclaimer, I live in London, and she's just saying, right, the kids have gone. There's no point. I'm just going to sell up now. If I'm going to be taxed every year. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the property market. It could be quite deflationary.
Absolutely. I think what's going to be quite interesting is in essence, the overall aim of the council tax surcharge makes sense. However, like you say, there is the trickle-down effect where it's like if somebody is, say, asset rich but cash poor, they're more likely to look at downsizing. And so then what that's going to do is put a lot more pressure on homes which are already kind of in scarce supply, because there wasn't much talk of launching affordable homes or the increase of properties for everyone. So that supply and demand scale is just going to get tipped further and, squeeze a lot more properties out of availability for either first-time buyers or, second steppers. There's just going to be a lot more competition, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's always something interesting to watch for the property market in a budget.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the property market is always doing something interesting. I think in the run up to the budget, there was so much speculation about what's going to happen to stamp duty and other charges. And I guess for some people, they were trying to get ahead of it and either buy quickly, sell quickly. But a lot of people were just waiting to see what happened. And I suppose, now we know what's coming into play. We'll see the consequences of that as it unfolds.
You mentioned stamp duty. I was interested to see that she's going to abolish that for new issues on the stock market. So new companies launching on the stock market the investors in them won't have to pay stamp duty on buying the shares. I mean, that's something that there has been lobbying for a long time. we haven't seen that many companies be launching on the London stock market for quite some time. They're called IPOs, initial public offerings. And I'm not sure an abolition of stamp duty in itself is going to revive that, but it is a positive step, I would say.
Yeah. No, definitely. I suppose looking at households and the costs that they're facing, for drivers particularly, there's been quite a big shift towards electric vehicles to help reduce fuel emissions and protect the environment. In the budget announcement today, a new duty for electric vehicles is being introduced at 3p per mile and 1.5p for plug-in hybrids. So it kind of feels like there is a sense of lifestyle creep when it comes to taxation, because these cars, which initially were supposed to be slightly more tax-friendly and eco-friendly, we're now seeing those charges creep in.
Yeah, interesting that it's being done per mile as well. So this is done on mileage, which means that if you live in an area, in a remote area where you do a lot of mileage, then this is not, buying an electric car isn't going to look like a brilliant idea. I saw someone quip earlier that no one in Scotland is going to want to have an electric car once this comes in. Yeah. But I thought, we were wanting to encourage electric cars as a good thing. So to have a new duty slapped on them seems a little bit odd.
It does indeed. But again, I guess we'll see what the knock-on effect of that will be. I believe that the idea was to get most people or get emissions down on the roads by 2030, which is creeping along quite quickly, but with higher taxation on electric vehicles, which are already very expensive to buy and insure, I guess we'll see how affordable that still works out to be in the future. This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more. Okay, so moving on to people who have benefited quite well from the budget announcement. One of the more positive outcomes is for lower income earners. So minimum wage is due to increase 4.1% to £12.71 per hour for workers aged between 21 and over. So that would increase annual earnings that would increase full-time earnings for a worker on living wage by around £900. That's quite a positive for, workers trying to just get more affordability and to get better value in terms of the work that they're doing.
Yeah, definitely. It's good if you're a young person and wanting to, earn something decent. Unfortunately, those young people are all struggling to find jobs, let alone, worry about what salary they're going to be paid. And even graduates are coming out of university and really struggling this year. I think because a lot of the jobs that are being done by entry-level workers are now being taken over starting to be taken over by AI. A lot of back office stuff, a lot of sort of menial, the stuff that you used to do to learn the job before you got promoted is all being automated. So, yeah, hopefully it doesn't stop young people getting jobs because they have to be paid more, because what we really need is young people to come in and be employed and learn skills, It's a very difficult balance.
Absolutely. And when we are looking at, work and things like the evolution of the workforce, new technologies coming in, I think there's a really important balance to try and strike with that as well. Another positive that has come out of the budget, which was announced a couple of months ago, is confirmation of the state pension increase. So the state pension is due to rise 4.8% in line with average earnings. So that is a good uplift for those already in retirement or due to receive the state pension when this comes in.
So the state pension uplift is obviously brilliant for those people in retirees, particularly those who are very reliant on state pension. To have it uplifted each year is great. And that's where we get this triple lot guarantee still in place. However, the state pension is funded out of current taxpayers' money. And there's no sort of magic pot there that you've contributed all your life that it's paid out of on an individual basis. And there's a lot of misconception about the state pension. People think I've put the money in and all my working life and then that pot is waiting there to pay me in retirement. So it doesn't work like that. And for those who realise that it's being paid out of current taxation from people who are working at the moment, there is this tension between, it's a bit of a generational tension really, because workers today know that they're not going to get the state pension until much later. So 67, 68, and there's a potential, because the state pension is under review by the government, that younger workers today might not get state pension until they're 70. And they're all thinking, when I get there might not be a triple lot for me. So I think, it's great, but it's not sustainable necessarily. And so every year that it's maintained potentially doesn't benefit younger workers when it comes to their turn and their retirement.
There is quite a difficult balance to strike with that kind of funding those who have been working and then those who are currently in work. And you're right, the state pension does fall under a lot of scrutiny when it comes to, well, how sustainable is it? Because it's currently, I believe, the second largest expense behind the NHS for government spending. So yeah, trying to sustain that for the long term is, quite an incredible job to try and do. But in the short term, I suppose quite good news for state pensioners, and it is above, the level of inflation at the moment. So hopefully should give a nice uplift when it comes to household finances. And fingers crossed, another thing that might be of good news is the freeze on sort of rail fares, which have gone up quite a lot. They just always seem to be the thing that keep increasing every year. And you do kind of shake your head and wonder what is going on. But it's the first freeze for the first time in 30 years.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear it, isn't it? Whether it will encourage people to use the train more, I don't know. But I mean, good news has to be. It's just rail fares are high.
Yes.
Across the board. And, it's much cheaper to drive. I mean, I travel from London to Lancashire quite regularly to visit family.
Yeah. And
it is extortionate. It's much cheaper for us as a family to go by car and suffer the traffic jams on the M6, but the rail fares, I'd also like to see hand in hand an improvement to rail service, because there's been so much disruption and no guarantees that the trains run on time. So, yeah, but anyway, it has to be a positive thing, Brianne. They've been frozen for the first time in 30 years.
We'll take it as a win. And like another thing for household finances, which has, hopefully is going to have a nice trickle-down effect, is energy bills. So the government are going to be scrapping the energy company obligation, which adds a lot of extra things onto your energy bill. They estimate that it's going to save us around £150. Fingers crossed. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good that they've done something, because the first thing that the Labour government did when they came to power was remove the winter fuel allowance, which was almost like a major PR disaster. So this is reversing a little of that, doing something for people, families and people who are struggling with their energy bills. Good to see.
Definitely. And then another freeze that I suppose we can look forward to is the freeze on prescriptions. So that's going to be held at £9.90 at the moment for NHS prescriptions that people pay for. And I suppose looking at the, rising living costs and the fact that things are just going up in a lot of different areas, it's refreshing to see that there are some things, especially the essentials like medical care, which are going to be frozen.
So not only have prescriptions been frozen, but importantly, the prescription prepayment certificate, which is the really great way of saving money on regular prescriptions, because that means you buy the certificate, then the amount that you pay for prescriptions is frozen each year. That has been frozen as well. So that's good news. So it's not just the individual prescriptions that are frozen, it's the actual certificate that you can use to save money that's being frozen too.
Which is great. And no, definitely. And I think, so that's going to be frozen for the 2026-2027 tax year. Fingers crossed, we might see something similar in next year's budget, but we shall wait and see. Another big announcement that was made was scrapping the 2-child benefit limit, which should have a positive uplift on larger families trying to balance their finances.
Definitely. I think this is often confused with child benefit. So child benefit, you get that however many number of children you have, you get a certain amount through. But this is relating to the universal credit benefits that come for your children. And that was capped at 2 children. And now lifting the cap for larger families will mean the ones that are unable to work and need to apply for universal credit will have more of their children catered for, I suppose, through the benefit system. And it's going to lift a lot of kids out of poverty. I think, this is an important step for the government to make. It's very eye-catching. And it, as it was positioned, it's hard to argue against children being lifted out of poverty. I think, but it's a massive new bill, massive new addition to the benefits bill. So, very interesting. Yeah.
No, definitely. Yeah. I think it's one of those things where there is a huge positive social impact piece that is hopefully going to empower a lot of families, and particularly with the cost of living being outrageously high, particularly over the last 5 years, hopefully gives some form of relief and helping ease that tension for families as well. So that's a quick run through of the winners and losers of this year's budget. Whichever side of the fence you're on, and depending on how you are in the world as well, there might be aspects of it that affect you positively and negatively on both sides. So trying to get a clear picture of your finances and potentially creating really good budgeting habits and putting those into practice could really help a lot of people at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you haven't put together a budget, then the budget is a great incentive to do it, at least once a year, and to review how you may be affected and to think, am I using all the advantages that are there for me? But I think any action you take should always be with an eye to your personal or family's financial goals and be done holistically. So, you may be in a £2 million house that's about to be taxed, but you may be contributing to salary sacrifice, but you may not have been using your ISA allowance that has been retained. So there's always something that you can probably tweak to put yourself and your family in a better position. And as with these things, the budget announces stuff that quite often isn't coming in straight away. So some of these measures are 2, even 3 years planned down the line. So there's time to tweak and take action, and definitely no need to panic.
I think that's a really important point about the idea of panicking, because there's been so much noise around this budget. So it's understandable why you might feel quite worried about when is this thing going to come in? How am I affected? Do I need to act now? But I suppose taking that more tempered approach and focusing on your circumstances, focusing on your budget will help empower you to make the right moves with your money. For people kind of looking at the cash ISA allowance reduction for under 65s, what are their options at the moment if they were looking to use cash as quite a big part of their wealth building strategy?
Yeah, well, they need to use this year's cash ISA allowance, which is £20,000, and not only use their own one, but if they're married, think about using their spouse's ISA allowance, and remember that children have junior ISA allowances as well. So as a family, there's usually quite a lot of leeway, lots of ways to stash cash away tax efficiently. But there are also things like premium bonds, which are, have tax advantages. They can earn tax-free prizes. And yeah, it's just a case of, using what's there. But I would say with cash, I think the reduction of the cash ISA allowance is being done for a reason. And that reason is that a lot of savers do hold too much cash. And so I would, look at, if you've been stashing it away for years and years and years, and you have way more than you would ever need in the case of an emergency with your family, or, a lot more to tide you over than 1 year's income or, half a year's income, then I think, think carefully about, do you really need to have all that money in cash? Should you be investing instead? Should you be thinking about stocks and shares ISA?
Absolutely. And for those who are currently saving towards a pension, I guess being quite clear on your overall savings goal and working towards that is really important. We've touched on it slightly before, but for those who potentially did lean quite heavily on salary sacrifice, what are some of the other options that they could potentially consider as part of their retirement planning and income planning?
I don't think there are. They just need to use their pension allowances. And if you're in a workplace pension and your employer matches your contributions, or if you're not in your workplace pension, get in it, because you'll get the tax relief and you'll hopefully get an employer contribution on top. You have to get a minimum employer contribution, but some employers do better than that. And just be consistent and keep contributing to pensions. There's been so much scaremongering about what the government might do to pensions, and people have been taking their money out of pensions. They're scared because of all these rumours, and none of it's come true. I mean, the salary sacrifice is a tweak to the pensions regime. It's not affecting the basics of pensions, which they get income tax relief on contributions, and when you take the money out, 25% is tax-free. Those fundamental things that apply to pensions haven't changed. And although there have been rumours over the years that they might change, they haven't changed yet. So they're still pensions are still definitely the best thing you can do in order to save for retirement.
I think that's such an important point as well for people who did panic and start moving things around before the official announcement was made. For those who potentially took a lot of cash out and, might have a lot of cash lying around and are under the 65 age threshold before the cash ISA limit goes back up to 20k, what are some of their options with any money that they may have taken out if they can't put it all into their allowance this year?
Well, allowances are allowances. I'm afraid if you've taken money out of a pension, there are specific rules around that. You can't just suddenly stash it back into a pension. So, yeah, well, they can put it into ISAs. They could invest it in a taxable account, but then they're going to be hit by higher taxes on income from savings and investments. They're potentially hit by capital gains tax on any gains, but it would still be investing it. It's just they've taken it out of a tax advantage regime. The pension, as soon as you take your money out of a pension, it can't grow free of the taxes that are normally levied on investments. So, it's tricky. I mean, I say you can't contribute to a pension again. There might be ways you can if you're under a certain age, if you're still earning, etc. But there may be limits on what you can put back in. So it's generally a bad move to take money out of a pension unless you really need it for income. Just leave it there until you really need the money.
That is such an important point and really, really valuable. Obviously, this budget was very hotly anticipated, and we've had a lot of different announcements come out. Is there anything else you would have liked to have seen be announced to either help, uplift workers or pensioners or investors or savers? Is there anything that you think that might have been missing?
What always bugs me is that the tax code in this country is so long and so complex, and a lot of the rules that we have to deal with are not very simple at all. And, that's why some people, in order to understand how to save and invest for the future, need to consult a financial advisor and need to pay to get somebody to explain it to them. And I just like everything to be a little bit simpler. I mean, I don't like the tweaks that have been made to the ISA allowance. I think it was too complicated already. Simplification would have been a much better way to go. I think anything that could have been done to taxes in general to simplify them would have been much more welcome than tweaking things like putting an extra 2 percentage point increase on savings and investments income. That's an attack on income, and then there's capital gain. Nothing's aligned. There's different tax rates for all sorts of different things. And whenever tax rates are tweaked, it quite often changes behaviour somehow, and people find ways around it. And then there's more tweaks introduced. So, call for simplification. Would have been nice to see something.
Simplification is the key word. I think sometimes the changes can get masked in a lot of lingo that you don't necessarily understand on first hearing, but then when you break it down, it's like, is this change really that effective? I'm not sure it is. So I think simplification moving forwards would be greatly appreciated by a lot of people. What's one tip that you would give anybody sort of listening to the budget who is looking to just make their finances stay on the right track despite all of these policy changes coming in?
Well, we've had what is the least worst outcome for pensions in the budget. We've had the salary sacrifice changed, which is something that not a lot of people use, and it's only fairly wealthy people on the whole use salary sacrifice. So I would say my top tip is to carry on using pensions to save for the future, and to think they're probably the best thing that I can do that's available to me to do with my money, stash it away for the long term. And, to think about, can I put a little bit more into a pension? Because compounding is a wonderful thing, because over the years your money gradually grows, and it should be something that you seriously consider. The power of putting small amounts in now can be a significant sum in 20 years' time.
That is very, very true. Slow and steady often wins the race, and that consistency often does win out over sort of big moves here and there. So that's really, really valuable. Moira, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been incredible to have your insights, and hopefully we'll just see how this budget unfolds.
Thanks, Brianne. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.